The archive entry was dated 30,000 years before Lena Calloway was born, and it read like the confession of someone who had already begun to forget. Departure protocol finalized. Indigenous population, primitive. Estimated developmental ceiling, low atmospheric flight. Resource extraction complete. Recommend, no return visit. Classification downgraded from colony asset to discarded holding. Lena closed the file. She had read it 900 times across 30 years of service in the Terran Diplomatic Corps, and each time the clinical language landed the same way, not with anger, but with a sadness so deep it had become structural. The Oravathi Dominion had governed Earth for 11,000 years before that departure notation. They had mined its oceans for deuterium, stripped 3 mountain ranges for rare minerals, and used the equatorial belt as a dumping ground for industrial slag. When the extraction economics turned unfavorable, they had packed their orbital platforms, recalled their overseers, and left without so much as a farewell broadcast to the species they had governed. 30,000 years ago, and now they were coming back. Lena stood on the observation terrace of the tidewall, the coastal megastructure that rose from the edge of what had once been the southern Atlantic seaboard. The tidewall was not a wall in any defensive sense. It was a city built vertically, 12 kilometers of habitable structure climbing from the continental shelf to the upper atmosphere, its lower levels anchored in the ocean floor, and its upper reaches brushing the stratosphere. 300 million people lived in its residential tiers. Its industrial bays produced 70% of Earth's atmospheric processing equipment. Its shipyards, embedded in the structure's midsection, had built the dreadnought Patience of Tides, which currently held station 40,000 kilometers overhead with its weapons cold and its crew at rest. Below Lena's terrace, the Atlantic stretched to the curved horizon, broken by aquaculture platforms and the gentle wakes of cargo submersibles running scheduled routes. The morning light was pale gold, filtered through the tidewall's atmospheric management systems, and it caught the edges of the structure's external buttresses in long amber lines. Somewhere above, invisible at this hour, the meridian ring crossed the sky Earth's primary orbital band, a continuous engineered structure circling the planet at geostationary altitude, housing defense grids, communications relays, and docking infrastructure for 11,000 registered vessels. She had been born in this building. Her grandmother had been born here, her grandmother's grandmother. 7 generations of Calloways had lived in the tidewall's residential tiers, and every one of them had known the same fact that every human alive knew: that Earth had once been owned, and that the owners might return. They called it the long remembering, not a government program, not a military doctrine, a cultural fact woven into the species the way language was woven in, or the instinct to look up at the night sky and wonder. Every child on Earth learned the history in their first year of formal education. The Oravathi came. They stayed for 11,000 years. They took what they wanted. They left when the taking was done. And for the 30,000 years since, humanity had built and expanded and prepared and remembered. The long remembering was not about revenge. Lena had spent her career making that distinction to foreign delegations, to nervous galactic observers, to the occasional species that mistook Earth's military capacity for aggression. The long remembering was about something quieter and harder to explain: the refusal to be caught unready again. Earth had been primitive when the Oravathi arrived. It had been primitive when they left. And humanity had decided, collectively, across millennia, that it would never be primitive again. Not because it feared the Oravathi specifically, but because it had learned what it meant to be powerless, and it had chosen, with the patience of a species that measured its planning horizons in geological time, to ensure that no force in the galaxy would ever again look at Earth and see something discardable. Lena's communicator chimed. She touched the small device at her wrist. Director Calloway. The voice belonged to Commander Hadley Voss, her military liaison, speaking from the Tidewalls Operations Center 12 floors below. The Oravathi fleet has completed its deceleration burn. 47 vessels. They are holding at the outer marker, 600,000 kilometers from the meridian ring. Transponder data confirms Oravathi Dominion origin codes. Composition: mixed, 12 capital ships, military configuration, 20 support vessels, logistics and crew transport, 15 civilian registry passenger liners, colonial administration types, no weapons locks, no active targeting. They are broadcasting a general hail on Oravathi diplomatic frequencies. Have we responded? Standard acknowledgement only. We confirmed receipt of their hail and instructed them to hold position pending diplomatic contact. They complied immediately. How fast did they comply? A brief pause, within 4 seconds of our transmission. 4 seconds, not the behavior of a returning conqueror, the behavior of someone arriving at a door they were not certain they had the right to knock on. Additional data, Voss continued. Their sensor emissions are consistent with active threat assessment. They are scanning everything: the ring, the orbital traffic, the defense installations. Their scan returns are being fed directly to their capital ship's tactical systems. They are cataloging our military assets. Let them, Lena said. The more they see, the less we need to explain. Director, the preliminary analysis is interesting. Based on their scan methodology, they are using detection protocols from the late colonial period. Their sensor technology has not advanced significantly since they departed Earth 30,000 years ago. Our countermeasures could render their entire sensor suite blind in approximately 4 seconds. I mention this only for context. Noted, the patience of Tide stays exactly where she is. No repositioning, no posture adjustments. I want her visible but still. Understood. I will take the greeting delegation to the Meridian Ring, arrange a shuttle, formal protocol, small delegation 6 people. Cultural attaché Osai, language specialist Marin Yu, 2 protocol officers and historian Darrow Anand. Anand. Voss's tone shifted. She knew the name. Everyone in the diplomatic service knew the name. 87 years old, 60 years studying the Oravathi colonial period, more Oravathi administrative records translated than any living human, and a quality Lena valued above all others in a diplomatic setting. He was incapable of being impressed by anything except evidence. I will have the shuttle ready in 40 minutes. Lena cut the connection and stood for a moment at the terrace railing. The wind off the Atlantic was steady, carrying salt and the faint industrial hum of the Tidewall's lower levels. She thought about the Oravathi notation she had just read. Indigenous population, primitive. 30,000 years ago, the species that had written those words had looked at humanity and seen nothing worth remembering. She wondered what they saw now. The shuttle lifted from the Tidewall's upper-tier launch bay and climbed through the atmosphere in a smooth parabolic arc. Lena sat in the forward cabin with her delegation, reviewing the briefing materials she had prepared over the preceding weeks, since the long-range sensor network had first detected the Oravathi fleet entering the solar system's outer boundary. The detection itself had been routine. Earth's sensor web extended 42 light-years in every direction, a network of relay platforms, passive detection arrays, and automated monitoring stations that tracked every mass signature entering or departing the local stellar neighborhood. The Oravathi fleet had been identified at a distance of 3 light-years. Its mass profile matched against records in the Heritage Archive, the institutional memory of Earth's encounter with the Dominion, maintained continuously for 30,000 years. The Heritage Archive had known they were coming before the Oravathi had finished plotting their final approach vector. Cultural attaché Kaya Osai sat across from Lena, reviewing imagery of the approaching fleet on a handheld display. Osai was 43, sharp-featured, with the composed bearing of someone who had conducted first contact protocols with 11 different species. She looked up from her display. "Their ships are old," she said. Lena nodded. "How old?" Design language places them in the late Dominion period, roughly equivalent to what they were flying when they left Earth. The hull configurations have been maintained, possibly rebuilt, but the fundamental architecture has not changed in 30,000 years. Lena absorbed that. In 30,000 years, the Oravathi Dominion had not significantly advanced its ship design. The implications were substantial. A civilization that did not iterate on its core technology was a civilization in stasis, maintaining what it had, no longer building toward what it could become. Meanwhile, Earth had gone from burning hydrocarbons to engineering megastructures that redefined its coastlines and orbital infrastructure, that managed 11,000 vessels from a single coordination center with 200 operators. Darrow Anand sat in the back of the cabin with his eyes closed, not asleep, but in the focused stillness of someone organizing decades of knowledge for imminent use. He opened his eyes as the shuttle passed through the upper atmosphere. "Director Calloway, a thought." "Go ahead." The Oravathi classified us as a discarded holding. In their administrative framework, that classification has legal weight. A discarded holding reverts to unclaimed status. If they are returning under Dominion law, they may believe they have a residual claim. "They may believe a great many things," Lena said. "We will help them understand the current situation." Anand's expression did not change. "I want to be clear about something. I have spent 60 years studying the Oravathi. They are not cruel by disposition. Their colonial administration was extractive, yes, but it operated under internal rules. They cataloged indigenous species. They maintained ecological baselines in regions they were not mining. They even left a medical station in orbit when they departed. It operated autonomously for 1100 years before its power systems failed." "You are telling me they cared." "I am telling you they were meticulous. It is not the same thing. They followed their protocols exactly. Their protocols simply did not include valuing the species they governed." Marin Yu, the language specialist, looked up from her translation interface. She was 31, the youngest member of the delegation, with the quiet intensity of someone who had learned 14 alien languages and considered each one a door into a different way of thinking. "I have been monitoring their general hail. The phrasing is interesting. They did not use the Oravathi administrative frequency for colonial returns. They used the diplomatic contact frequency, the one reserved for approaching sovereign territory." "They know," Osai said. "They suspect," Yu corrected. "Their sensor systems are good enough to detect the meridian ring and the orbital traffic. They can see the fleet formations. They know this is not the primitive world they left." The shuttle passed through the upper atmospheric boundary and into the traffic management zone of the meridian ring. Automated systems assigned their approach vector, slotting them into a traffic stream that included 2 cargo haulers, a patrol corvette on rotation, and a diplomatic courier returning from the Thessari Compact's embassy station. The traffic moved with the synchronized precision of a system that had been operating continuously for over 9,000 years. Through the shuttle's forward viewport, the meridian ring resolved from a distant line into a structure of staggering scale. Its cross-section was 2 kilometers wide at the broadest point, a continuous band of engineered material circling the planet at geostationary altitude. Docking bays lined its inner surface. Defense installations studded its outer surface at regular intervals, energy weapon emplacements, point defense arrays, sensor clusters, each one individually maintained and capable of engaging targets at orbital distances. 30,000 years ago, Anand said quietly, the Oravathi departed from a world that did not have artificial satellites. The first human satellite was launched approximately 700 years after the Oravathi departure. From zero orbital presence to the meridian ring in 29,000 years. The Oravathi built their orbital infrastructure over a span of 60,000 years. We built with purpose, Anand said. Speed was a byproduct. The shuttle docked at the Meridian Ring's diplomatic bay, a section of the ring specifically designed for interspecies contact, with adjustable atmosphere, gravity, and lighting systems capable of accommodating the physiological requirements of over 200 known species. The bay was large enough to hold a corvette, its walls curved and translucent, offering a panoramic view of Earth below and the star field above. Lena's delegation assembled in the greeting hall, a wide, open space with a floor of polished composite material and a ceiling that was entirely transparent, showing the ring's external infrastructure curving away in both directions. Through the ceiling, Earth dominated the view, its rebuilt surface visible from this altitude. The tidewall was a bright line along the Atlantic coast. The continental interiors showed the geometric patterns of megacity infrastructure interspersed with preserved wilderness zones. The Pacific surface glinted with the ordered arrays of aquaculture platforms and energy collection fields. Signal the Oravathi fleet, Lena said. Inform them that a diplomatic delegation is prepared to receive their representatives at the Meridian Ring, Docking Bay 7. Provide approach vectors and docking protocols. Standard escort 2 patrol corvettes positioned as guides, not interceptors. The signal was sent. The response came in 12 seconds. Oravathi Dominion vessel steward's authority acknowledges. Delegation shuttle departing now. Estimated transit time, 41 minutes. 41 minutes. Their shuttle was slow by Earth standards. The Oravathi had not improved their propulsion systems. Lena used the time. She walked to the greeting hall's tactical display, a discrete panel embedded in the wall, accessible only to authorized personnel, showing a real-time map of the Sol system's military disposition. The patience of tides was the most visible asset, but it was far from the only one. 12 capital vessels held station at strategic points throughout the inner system. 400 patrol corvettes maintained their standard routes. The Meridian Ring's own defense grid, 6,000 individual weapon emplacements, was at standard readiness. Not elevated. Standard. Because standard readiness for Earth's defense infrastructure was sufficient to address any conceivable threat from 47 vessels, whose most advanced ship was roughly equivalent to a human patrol corvette. Commander Voss's voice came through the tactical display's comm channel. Director, the Oravathi capital ships are maintaining formation at the outer marker. No weapons activity, no shield activity. Their formation is interesting. How so? They have arranged themselves in a crescent pattern, concave face toward Earth. In Oravathi military doctrine, that formation is used for protective screening of civilian vessels. They have placed their capital ships between their civilian vessels and us. They are protecting their people from us, Lena said. Yes, they are afraid of what we might do. 30,000 years ago, the Oravathi had looked at humanity and felt nothing but administrative indifference. Now they were arranging their warships in a defensive posture against the species they had once classified as pre-spaceflight. The reversal was so complete that it should have felt like justice. It did not. It felt like the culmination of a very long and very lonely process, of becoming something the universe could not ignore. Maintain current posture, Lena said. No changes. They will understand our intentions from our stillness. She stood at the observation wall and looked down at Earth. She had been a diplomat for 30 years. She had greeted the Thessari Compact, the Vensolari Federation, the remnants of the Cathari Ascendancy. She had negotiated trade agreements, border disputes, and one very tense standoff over mining rights in the outer system. She had never greeted the species that had once owned her world. She thought about her grandmother. Ava Calloway had been a structural engineer in the Tidewall's expansion team, responsible for the residential tier that Lena now lived in. Ava had worked on that tier for 43 years, and she had spoken about it the way other people spoke about raising children, with pride, with exhaustion, with the fierce tenderness of someone who had given a piece of their life to something that would outlast them. The tier had been completed 2 years before Ava died. 300,000 people lived in it now. Ava had never spoken about the Oravathi with anger. She had spoken about them with a sadness that Lena recognized because she carried the same variety. It was not personal grief. It was the grief of understanding the knowledge that for 11,000 years the Oravathi had walked Earth's surface, breathed its air, used its resources, governed its people, and never once asked what those people might become. The grief was not for what had been taken. It was for the connection that had never been made. 30,000 years of building had not erased that grief. It had refined it. Humanity had grown beyond anything the Oravathi could have imagined, and the sadness remained not as a wound, but as a compass. It pointed toward the question that had driven human civilization since the departure. What does it mean to be worth remembering? Kaya Osai joined her at the observation wall. The Oravathi shuttle is on approach, ETA 14 minutes. How does it look? Functional. Clean lines, well-maintained hull, but the design is unmistakably antique. If I saw it in a museum, I would place it in the early expansion period of any mid-tier galactic civilization. They were not mid-tier when they left. No, they were a dominant regional power controlling 400 star systems. Osai paused. Our intelligence suggests they now control fewer than 60. The contraction of empires. Lena had studied it across dozens of species. The pattern was remarkably consistent, expansion driven by resource extraction, followed by overextension, followed by internal fragmentation, followed by a slow reduction to core holdings maintained through institutional inertia rather than active strength. The Oravathi Dominion had followed the pattern precisely. 400 systems reduced to 60. 30,000 years of slow diminishment. And in that same 30,000 years, humanity had grown from a single planet burning fossil fuels to a multi-system civilization of 240 billion people, with a unified defense infrastructure that could detect incoming vessels at 42 light years and respond with coordinated force at any point within its borders. The Oravathi shuttle entered the docking bay with the careful precision of a vessel whose pilot was unfamiliar with the facility. The docking clamps engaged. The atmospheric seal cycled. The shuttle's hatch opened. Lena had studied Oravathi physiology in preparation. They were tall 2 meters on average, with elongated torsos covered in a smooth, pale integument that shifted color subtly with emotional state. Their faces were narrow, with large forward-facing eyes adapted for low-light environments and a wide, lipless mouth capable of producing the complex harmonic vocalizations that constituted their language. Their hands had 6 digits, each tipped with a hard, translucent nail. They moved with a fluid grace that suggested a species evolved in lower gravity than Earth's current standard. The delegation that emerged from the shuttle was small. 5 Oravathi, wearing formal garments of dark blue fabric that Anand quietly identified as administrative vestments, the clothing of Dominion civil servants, not military officers. Their integument was pale, shifting between ivory and a faint lavender that Anand said indicated uncertainty. The lead Oravathi was older. The integument around the eyes had gone translucent with age, revealing the fine capillary network underneath. The eyes themselves were amber, large, and they moved across the greeting hall with the systematic attention of someone cataloging everything. Those eyes stopped on the observation wall, on Earth below, on the tide wall, visible as a bright vertical line along the coast, on the megacity patterns across the continental interiors, on the orbital infrastructure visible through the transparent ceiling, the ring curving away, the patrol formations moving in synchronized routes, the distant mass of the Patience of Tides holding station with its running lights steady. The old Oravathi looked at the Patience of Tides for a long time. Lena knew what the Oravathi was seeing: a vessel 4 kilometers long, its hull a layered architecture of armor plate and weapon systems, holding station with the casual confidence of something that had nowhere it needed to be and nothing it needed to prove. The Dominion's largest warship, according to intelligence briefings, was 900 meters. The Patience of Tides was 4 times that length and carried weapon systems that operated on principles the Oravathi had not yet developed. One of the younger Oravathi delegates, slender, with integument that shifted rapidly between pale green and yellow, turned to the lead Oravathi and spoke in low harmonics. Marin Yu, listening through her translation earpiece, whispered to Lena, "The junior delegate is saying that vessel alone could disable their entire fleet." The old Oravathi's integument flushed from pale ivory to a deep, uneven violet, the color of shock. Lena stepped forward. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind for weeks, but rehearsal and reality were different textures. The reality was the smell of the Oravathi shuttle's atmosphere, cool, mineral-tinged, unfamiliar. The reality was the sound of the lead Oravathi's breathing, slightly faster than baseline. The reality was the expression in those amber eyes, which Lena's training allowed her to read. Not hostility, not arrogance, not the bureaucratic indifference of the departure notation. Fear. Genuine, unguarded fear. "Welcome to Earth," Lena said. She spoke in standard galactic, the lingua franca of interspecies diplomacy. "I am Director Lena Calloway of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. I am authorized to receive your delegation and discuss the purpose of your visit." The old Oravathi took a moment to respond. When the voice came, it was measured, harmonic, translated through a device at the delegation's interpreter's throat. "I am Overseer Emeritus Savath Tal, of the Oravathi Dominion Administrative Council. I am here to discuss the status of the Dominion's former holding, designated as Terrestrial Zone 7. Terrestrial Zone 7, that was what they had called Earth, not a name, a filing designation. Lena kept her expression neutral. Beside her, Darrow Annan's face was a mask of professional composure, but his eyes were sharp. "Earth," Lena said. "You are here to discuss Earth." "Yes." "May I ask the nature of your interest?" Another pause. Savath Tal's gaze moved again to the observation wall, to the planet below. When the Oravathi spoke again, the harmonics in the voice had shifted lower, slower, carrying what you would later identify as the tonal register of formal regret. "The Dominion is diminished. Our administrative records indicate that significant genetic archives and mineral reserves were maintained in storage facilities on this world during our colonial period. We have come to determine whether those facilities still exist and to request access to their contents." They had come back for what they left behind, not as conquerors, as supplicants. Lena looked at Savath Tal and saw the full weight of 30,000 years in the Oravathi's expression. The Dominion that had governed 400 systems now controlled 60. The species that had classified Earth as a discarded holding was standing in a structure it could not have imagined, asking permission to retrieve things it had abandoned. "The storage facilities you refer to were discovered by human archaeological teams approximately 22,000 years ago," Lena said. "Their contents have been cataloged, preserved, and maintained by the Heritage Archive, a Terran institution dedicated to the stewardship of all cultural and biological materials of non-terrestrial origin found on Earth." Savath Tal's integument went through 3 color shifts in rapid succession. Ivory, lavender, a deep, mottled indigo that Anand would later tell Lena indicated a combination of relief and shame, so intense it overwhelmed the Oravathi's chromatic regulation. "You preserved them." "For 22,000 years," Lena said. Every item inventoried, every sample maintained, every record translated and cross-referenced. The Heritage Archive has employed over 19,000 specialists across its operational history for the purpose of maintaining Oravathi materials alone. 19,000. Savath Tal's voice dropped to its lowest register. The Dominion's own heritage ministry currently employs 400. 400 people to maintain the heritage of a civilization that had once spanned 400 star systems. 19,000 humans, a species the Dominion had never considered worth engaging to maintain the heritage the Dominion had abandoned on a world it had discarded. Anand, standing behind Lena, caught her eye. His expression said what his professionalism would not permit him to speak. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the silence of understanding arriving slow, massive, inevitable, like a tide coming in. Lena led the Oravathi delegation through the Meridian Ring's diplomatic corridor toward the Heritage Archive's orbital annex. The corridor was wide, designed for multi-species traffic, with transparent walls offering continuous views of Earth below and the ring's infrastructure on either side. The Oravathi walked slowly, their attention pulled in every direction. Savath Tal stopped at a junction where the corridor opened into a wide atrium. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a formation of 6 human patrol corvettes crossed their field of view, each vessel approximately 400 meters long, moving in precise diamond formation, their hulls catching the sunlight in sharp reflections. Below them, a civilian cargo transport 3 times their mass moved along a lower traffic lane, its hull painted with the corporate markings of an aquaculture cooperative. "How many vessels?" Savath Tal asked. "In the Sol system at present, approximately 12,000 registered," Lena said, "civilian and military." 12,000. The Oravathi's voice had gone flat. The Dominion's home system maintains 300. A massive shadow crossed the atrium windows. Savath Tal looked up. A human capital ship 2 kilometers long, its hull a dark composite that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, crossed their field of view on a standard patrol route. The ship moved in complete silence, its drive systems producing no visible emission, its passage marked only by the brief dimming of sunlight through the windows. Point defense turrets lined its ventral surface, each one larger than the Oravathi shuttle in the docking bay. "That ship is on a routine patrol," Lena said, because the Oravathi was staring at it with an expression that suggested involuntary threat calculations. "It will complete its circuit and return to its berth. It has no tasking related to your visit." "How many capital ships does Earth maintain?" "Currently, 247 in the Sol system, an additional 312 deployed across our colonial holdings. 559 capital ships. The Dominion had 12. They passed through the annex entrance, a set of doors that opened automatically, revealing a space designed with the deliberate intention of communicating institutional permanence. The walls were lined with display cases containing artifacts from every species whose materials were held in the Heritage Archive. Each case was individually climate-controlled, individually lit, individually maintained. The oldest displays dated back 18,000 years. The newest had been installed 3 months ago. The Oravathi section occupied an entire wing. Lena watched Savath Tal's face as they entered it. The Oravathi stopped walking. The integument went entirely still, no color shifts, no movement, as though the chromatic system had shut down from overload. The amber eyes moved slowly across the displays. Oravathi administrative tablets, cleaned and preserved, their data surfaces still readable. Colonial uniforms in atmospheric cases, the fabric maintained at precisely the humidity and temperature specified in Oravathi textile conservation, manuals that the Heritage Archive had reconstructed from fragmentary records found in the storage facilities. Mining equipment, geological survey instruments, medical devices, personal effects. each item catalogued with a precision that bordered on reverence. One of the junior Oravathi delegates stopped at a display case containing a set of children's educational materials, learning tablets, writing implements, picture story discs. The display tag read, Educational Materials Juvenile Instruction Set, recovered from Residential Quarter, Equatorial Administrative Complex. Period. Mid-colonial. The junior delegate's integument went entirely white. In Yu's whispered translation, "Those were for our children. They brought their children here. I did not know they raised families on this world." They had. The Heritage Archive's records documented it extensively. Oravathi families had lived on Earth for generations, administrators, engineers, technicians who had brought their partners and their children to the colony world and raised them in residential quarters built to Oravathi specifications. When the departure order came, the families had packed what they could carry and left the rest, including their children's schoolwork. 22,000 years later, a human institution had found those learning tablets and preserved them with the same care it gave to military equipment and genetic archives, because heritage did not distinguish between a weapon and a child's writing exercise. Both were evidence that someone had lived. "This is a fraction," Lena said. "The full collection is maintained in a dedicated facility on Earth's surface, in the structure you may have noticed along the Atlantic coast. The vertical structure. The tide wall. Its lower levels include a heritage archive facility with climate-controlled storage for over 400,000 Oravathi artifacts." Savath Tal reached toward a display case containing a personal effects container, a small box with Oravathi script etched into its surface. The six-fingered hand hovered over the glass. "This belonged to Overseer Kurath Ven. She administered Terrestrial Zone 7 during the final century of occupation. She was my ancestor, 14 generations." The display tag confirmed the identification. Personal effects, Overseer Kirathven. Recovered from Administrative Complex Ruins, Southern Continental Mass. Contents: Communication Crystal Personal, Administrative Seal Official, Grooming Implement Ceremonial. Preservation Status: Intact. "She left this behind," Savath Tal said. "When the Dominion departed, non-essential personal items were not allocated cargo space. She would have considered this a minor loss." "We did not consider it minor," Lena said. The Oravathi looked at her. The amber eyes were wet. Lena had not known the Oravathi could produce tears, but the physiology was apparently similar, fluid accumulating at the margins of the large eyes, refracting the light. "Why?" Savath Tal asked. "Why did you keep all of this?" Lena had anticipated the question. She had prepared an answer measured, diplomatic, appropriate for the formal setting. But standing in front of an alien who was looking at the preserved personal effects of a 14-generation ancestor, she found that the prepared answer was insufficient. "Because you left," she said, "and leaving does not erase the obligation to remember." The rest of the tour took 2 hours. Lena led the Oravathi delegation through the genetic archives, where 22,000 years of preserved biological samples, plant species, microbial cultures, genetic material from 6 Oravathi subspecies, were maintained in cryogenic storage with redundant monitoring systems that had not experienced a single hour of unscheduled downtime in 9,000 years. She showed them the linguistic research wing, where a team of 14 specialists maintained a comprehensive dictionary of all known Oravathi dialects, including 3 that had gone extinct on the Dominion's homeworld. "We teach your language," Lena said, "not the formal administrative register, the common tongue, the language your workers and families spoke." Savath Tal's integument had settled into a steady, deep blue. "The common tongue is no longer widely spoken in the Dominion. The administrative register has replaced it in most public life." "We have recordings," Lena said, thousands of hours, recovered from personal communication devices found in the storage facilities. My own grandchildren do not speak the common tongue, Savath Tal said. It was dropped from our educational curriculum 2,000 years ago. The administrative register was considered more useful. The word useful sat in the room like a stone dropped into still water, the same logic that had classified Earth as a discarded holding, value measured by utility, function, return on investment. The Oravathi had built an entire civilization on the principle that things which were not useful could be set aside, and they had applied that principle so consistently that they had set aside their own language. Humanity had found that language in a storage vault on a world the Oravathi had abandoned, and had spent 22,000 years making sure it survived. In a corridor adjacent to the linguistic wing, they passed a classroom. Through a window, Lena could see 20 human students seated in curved rows. An instructor was demonstrating Oravathi harmonic pronunciation, producing the complex tonal patterns through a throat-mounted resonance device. The students practiced along, their voices filling the corridor with sounds that had not been heard on the Oravathi homeworld in generations. One student, a young woman, perhaps 20, looked up and saw the Oravathi delegation through the window. Her eyes went wide. She whispered something to the student beside her. Within seconds, the entire class was looking at the corridor, not with fear or hostility, with the breathless recognition of people who had spent years studying a language and were suddenly confronted with native speakers for the first time. The instructor stepped to the window. "Director Calloway," she said through the intercom, "is that are they?" "Oravathi," Lena confirmed, "from the Dominion itself." The instructor turned to her students. "Class, we are looking at the first Oravathi to set foot on this ring. Some of you have studied their common tongue for 4 years. Would anyone like to offer a greeting?" The young woman who had first noticed them stood. She spoke in Oravathi common tongue, not perfect, the harmonic alignment slightly off, but recognizable. She said a single phrase. Marin Yu translated it for Lena as a formal Oravathi greeting reserved for returning travelers. The path was long, but the welcome was always here. Savath Tal's composure broke. The integument went through a cascade of colors: violet, blue, gray, white, and the old Oravathi turned away from the window and stood very still, facing the wall, for nearly a minute. The younger delegates stood around their leader in a protective semicircle, their own integuments cycling with reflected distress. When Savath Tal turned back, the amber eyes were clear, but the voice was not steady. "She speaks the common tongue better than my grandchildren." "She has been studying for 4 years, Lena said. 4 years? We had 11,000 years and did not teach your people our language. You had 22,000 years and taught yourselves." The delegation continued through the research laboratories. A human botanist was tending a row of bioluminescent plants, Oravathi agricultural specimens, grown from seeds recovered in the storage facilities. The plants pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light. "These are Oravathi marshglow," Savath Tal said. "They grew along the waterways of our homeworld. They are extinct there now. The waterways were redirected for industrial use 8,000 years ago. We have viable seed stock for over 200 Oravathi plant species," Lena said. 47 are now extinct on your homeworld. We can provide specimens for reintroduction if the Dominion wishes." Savath Tal touched one of the glowing fronds. The plant responded to the touch, brightening slightly. The old Oravathi's hand trembled. In an adjacent laboratory, a preservation technician was conducting a routine inspection of Oravathi metallurgical samples. The technician, a woman in her 50s with the careful hands of someone who had been handling irreplaceable artifacts for decades, looked up as the delegation entered. She froze for a moment, then stood and offered a formal bow, not a human bow, but an Oravathi gesture of professional respect between colleagues, learned from the cultural archive. "You taught your preservation staff our protocols," Savath Tal said. The Heritage Archive trains all staff in the cultural norms of the species whose materials they maintain, Lena said. The Oravathi program is the most comprehensive. 4 years of mandatory training before any technician is authorized to handle Oravathi artifacts. The technician held up the metallurgical sample. She had been inspecting a small disc of dark alloy with Oravathi script pressed into its surface. Overseer Emeritus. This is item 47,291 in the Oravathi collection. Metallurgical reference sample, North Equatorial extraction site. My family has maintained this collection section for 3 generations. My grandmother logged this specific item for the first time 81 years ago. 3 generations of one family maintaining one section of one wing of one facility, dedicated to preserving the heritage of a species that had classified the preservers as primitive. The formal session convened 3 hours later in the Meridian Ring's diplomatic chamber, a circular room with walls configured as observation windows. Earth filled the view behind Lena's delegation. The Oravathi sat opposite, their backs to the stars. Savath Tal formally requested the return of all Oravathi materials held in the Heritage Archive. Lena formally acknowledged the request. The terms took time. The Heritage Archive's legal framework for the repatriation of alien materials had been developed over centuries, not in anticipation of this specific meeting, but as a general protocol for the possibility that any species whose artifacts Earth held might one day return to claim them. The framework was thorough, covering everything from transport logistics to preservation chain documentation to the rights of researchers who had built their careers studying the materials. OS handled the operational details with the calm precision of someone who had negotiated more contentious arrangements. Transfer timelines were established, a phased process spanning 18 months, allowing the Heritage Archive's preservation teams to prepare each artifact for transport according to Oravathi conservation standards. The genetic materials required specialized cryogenic transport vessels, and Osai noted that Earth would provide them, since the Dominion's remaining fleet did not include purpose-built cryogenic haulers. We will construct them, Osai said. The Tidewall's shipyards can produce 4 vessels of the required specification within 6 months. One of the junior Oravathi delegates looked at the colleague beside them. In Yu's whispered translation, they will build new ships just to return our property. Savath Tal sat very still through this exchange. The integument had settled into the deep blue that Anand had identified as sustained emotional weight, not a single spike of feeling, but a continuous state. The Overseer Emeritus was processing something that exceeded the scope of the negotiation. But beneath the procedure, something else was happening, something Lena could feel in the quality of the silences between statements, in the way Savath Tal's delegation looked at her people, in the way her own team responded. The Oravathi were encountering a species they had dismissed, and the species they had dismissed was treating them with dignity. Not warmth, dignity. The distinction mattered. Lena was not offering friendship, alliance, or absolution. She was offering the precise, measured respect of a civilization that had learned what it meant to be disrespected and had chosen to respond differently. The Heritage Archive proposes the following terms for the transfer of Oravathi materials, Lena said. All physical artifacts will be returned in containers designed to Oravathi conservation specifications. Genetic materials will be transported in cryogenic units maintained by Heritage Archive personnel during transit. Cultural records will be returned in original format, accompanied by complete translation indices in 7 galactic languages. In the cost, Savath Tal asked. No cost. The materials belong to the Oravathi Dominion. We were maintaining them on your behalf. Savath Tal's integument cycled through 3 shades of blue. You spent 22,000 years preserving our heritage. You employed 19,000 specialists. You built facilities, developed preservation technologies, conducted research, and you ask nothing in return. We ask one thing, Lena said. We request permission to retain copies of your cultural archives, language records, historical documents, artistic works. For our educational curriculum, you want to continue teaching our language. We want to ensure that the knowledge is never lost, regardless of what happens to either of our civilizations. The Oravathi delegation conferred in low harmonics. Lena waited. Through the observation windows behind her, Earth turned. The Terminator line had advanced, and the tidewall was catching the late afternoon light, its 12-kilometer height casting a shadow that stretched across the Atlantic like a sundial marking the hours of a very long day. Savath Tal turned back. Agreed, and I have an additional request. I would like to visit the surface, the storage facilities, the place where my ancestors served. I want to see what you built on the world we abandoned. I would be honored to escort you personally, Lena said. The descent from the Meridian Ring to the tidewall took 22 minutes. Lena sat beside Savath Tal in the shuttle's forward cabin. The rest of the Oravathi delegation had remained on the ring, hosted by Osai. Anand and Yu accompanied Lena. The shuttle's descent path took them past the eastern face of the Meridian Ring, where a section of new construction was underway. Hundreds of automated drones worked in coordinated patterns, extending the ring's width by another 200 meters. The project, according to the Public Engineering Database, had been authorized 70 years ago and was scheduled for completion in another 40. A century of construction. Planned, funded, staffed across multiple generations of personnel. Savath Tal watched the construction. How long has the ring been under continuous expansion? The original ring was completed approximately 12,000 years ago. It has been under continuous expansion and maintenance since. The current width is 4 times the original specification. 12,000 years of unbroken construction. The longest-serving construction project in human history. It has never been paused. Neither spoke for several minutes. The planet grew below them, its surface resolving from abstract patterns into recognizable geography. Director Calloway, how does it feel to know that the species that classified you as incapable of reaching space now arrives at your orbital infrastructure in vessels that your patrol corvettes could disable in seconds? Lena considered the question. It does not feel like triumph, she said. It feels like the end of a very long vigil. We built everything you see because we remembered what it meant to be powerless. We prepared for 30,000 years because we did not know what would come next. And now that you are here, the feeling is not victory. It is the recognition that the preparation was worth it. Not because we needed it against you, but because building it made us what we are. Savath Tal stepped onto the tidewall's main concourse and stopped. The concourse was a wide, curving avenue that ran the length of the structure's midsection, lined with residential access points, commercial spaces, public gardens, and transit stations. People moved through it in steady streams, hundreds visible at any given moment, going about the ordinary business of lives lived inside a 12-kilometer vertical city. Children ran between the garden planters. A maintenance crew was replacing a section of overhead lighting with the methodical efficiency of people who had performed that task 10,000 times before. How many people live here? Savath Tal asked. In the tidewall specifically, 300 million. In the Atlantic coastal corridor, approximately 2 billion. 2 billion people along one coast of one continent. The Dominion's entire remaining population was 4 billion. A child, perhaps 6 years old, looked up from a garden planter and stared at the tall, pale alien with unguarded curiosity. The child's mother put a hand on the girl's shoulder and nodded to Savath Tal with the polite neutrality of someone encountering a foreign dignitary in a public space. Not afraid, not hostile, simply acknowledging a presence and moving on. They are not afraid of me, Savath said. No, Lena said, they are not. When the Dominion governed this world, the indigenous population avoided our personnel. They would not make eye contact. They crossed to the other side of roadways when they saw us approaching. Anand spoke. That is confirmed in the colonial records. Oravathi overseers noted human avoidance behavior and attributed it to what they called appropriate hierarchical response. It was fear, Savath said. Yes, Anand said, it was fear. 300 million people in this structure alone, not one of them afraid, not because they did not know what the Oravathi had done, but because fear required vulnerability, and these people were not vulnerable. They lived inside a 12-kilometer vertical city on a planet defended by a fleet that could engage threats at interstellar distances. Lena guided them through the residential tier toward the transit station that would take them to the lower levels. The route passed through a public atrium, a vaulted space 10 stories high, open to the tidewall's exterior on one side, where the Atlantic light poured in and caught the edges of a structure that Savath stopped to examine. It was a memorial wall, not stone or metal, but a living display, a mosaic of botanical panels, each containing a different species of plant grown in soil from a different region of Earth. The plants were labeled in 12 languages, including Oravathi Common Tongue. The inscription at the base, rendered in standard galactic and repeated in every language represented, read, "To those who came and left, we remember." Savath read the inscription 3 times. Lena knew because she watched the amber eyes track the text, return to the beginning, and track it again. This is not hostile, Savath said. No. It is not welcoming either. No, it is accurate. The Oravathi reached out and touched the edge of a botanical panel containing a small fern, earth native, common, unremarkable. Below it, in Oravathi Common Tongue, a secondary inscription read, "This fern grew in the foundation soil of the first Orivathi administrative complex on Earth. The complex was demolished 12,000 years ago. The soil was preserved." You preserved the soil, Savath said. The Heritage Archive preserves context, Lena said. The soil tells the story of what was built on it and what replaced it. The fern tells the story of what grows when the builders leave. Anand, standing beside her, added quietly, "There are 412 memorial installations throughout the tidewall. They are maintained by volunteer organizations. Some families have tended the same installation for centuries." Volunteer, Savath repeated. Unpaid, uncompelled. They do it because the act of remembering is considered a civic virtue. The transit capsule carried them downward through the tidewall's interior, past residential levels and commercial districts and industrial bays, descending through layers of civilization stacked vertically like geological strata. Through the capsule's transparent walls, Lena watched the light change from the golden Atlantic light of the upper tiers to the cooler, bluer illumination of the mid-levels, and finally to the warm amber glow of the archive levels, designed to match Oravathi optical comfort specifications. Savath noticed the light change, the illumination. Matched to Oravathi visual preferences, Lena said. The research was conducted 7,000 years ago, based on optical data recovered from Oravathi medical equipment in the storage facilities. You designed your lighting for a species you had never met. We designed this section of the facility for the species whose materials it contains. It seemed appropriate. They descended to the Heritage Archive facility. It occupied the tidewall's deepest levels, bored into the continental shelf rock, climate-controlled and monitored by systems whose operational logs stretched back 18,000 years. The corridors were wide, lit by warm amber light that matched the spectrum specifications in Oravathi optical comfort studies conducted by Heritage Archive researchers who had never met a living Oravathi. The main vault was vast, Rows of storage units extended in ordered lines, each individually sealed, each monitored, each maintained. The air was cool and perfectly still. The silence had the quality of a cathedral not empty, but held. Savath Tal walked the rows slowly. Translucent nailed fingers brushed the surfaces of storage units without opening them. The Oravathi paused at a unit near the center of the vault. Mining survey equipment, Northern Continental Mass Extraction Site, period, late colonial. This was standard field kit, mass-produced. We left thousands of them behind because the transport cost exceeded the replacement cost. Everyone we found is here, Lena said. Everyone. Everyone. The Heritage Archive does not evaluate items by their original value. It preserves everything with equal care. Savath Tal's hand rested on the storage unit. The integument had gone a shade Lena had not seen before, a deep, luminous gray that seemed to pulse with some internal rhythm. You, standing quietly behind Lena, would later describe it as the chromatic expression of grief so old it had become permanent. In a side chamber, they found the mineral reserves, the stated reason for the visit. 18 metric tons of Sesratha-grade extraction minerals, sealed in containers that maintained their chemical stability at molecular precision. The Dominion needed these minerals. Their industrial base had been declining for millennia, and these reserves represented a reprieve not permanent, but meaningful. Savath Tal stood before the containers for a long time. The minerals were what had brought the fleet across the stars. The stated purpose, the administrative justification. But standing in a vault that contained 400,000 artifacts preserved with devotional care by a species that had been classified as primitive, the mineral reserves felt like the smallest thing in the room. Director Calloway, my species governed your world for 11,000 years. We cataloged your biosphere, extracted your resources, administered your population. We maintained records of your climate patterns, your geological features, your seasonal cycles. We knew your world in extraordinary detail. Yes, we never knew your people at all. The words hung in the cool air of the vault. Lena let them settle the way she would let a stone sink through deep water slowly, reaching the bottom in its own time. Savath Tal turned from the storage units and faced Lena directly. The integument had gone quiet, a muted silver gray, stable and still. My ancestor Kureth Ven signed the departure notation. Indigenous population, primitive. She made an assessment of your species based on a single observation at a single moment in your development, and she encoded that assessment into an administrative record that determined how the Dominion would regard this world for the next 30,000 years. She was not wrong about the facts. Your species was pre-spaceflight. Your technology was primitive by Dominion standards, but she was wrong about what the facts meant. She saw a primitive species and concluded that it would always be primitive. She looked at a child and decided it would never grow. Every species grows, Lena said, given time, given reason. You had both, Savath Tal said. Time because we gave it to you when we left. Reason because we gave it to you when we treated you as nothing. Lena looked at the old Oravathi and felt the sadness, the deep, structural sadness that had lived in her family for 7 generations, that had lived in her species for 30,000 years, shift one final time. Not disappearing, transforming, becoming something she had not expected. Not forgiveness, not yet, perhaps not ever, but something adjacent to it. A recognition that the Oravathi standing before her was not the Oravathi who had written the departure notation. That 30,000 years had changed both species. That the grief was real on both sides, humanity's grief for the connection never made, and the Oravathi's grief for the understanding that arrived 30,000 years too late. No, Lena said. You did not know us, but you are here now, and what happens next is a choice we both get to make. Savath Tal looked at her. The amber eyes held tears that the Oravathi did not wipe away. I would like to start by learning, Savath Tal said, about your species, about what you built, about why you kept our things when we gave you every reason to throw them away. Lena thought about the long remembering, about the 30,000 years of building, preparing, maintaining, and choosing to preserve what had been left behind by those who had not valued it, about the generations of Callaways who had lived in the tidewall and looked out at the Atlantic and known that somewhere beyond the stars, the species that had abandoned them might someday return. About the question that had driven human civilization since the departure, what does it mean to be worth remembering? And the answer that had emerged, slowly, across millennia. You become worth remembering by remembering everything, including the ones who forgot you. Then stay, she said. Stay as long as you need. We have been waiting a very long time to tell this story, and we would prefer to tell it properly. Through the vault's deep walls, she could feel the tidewall humming, the steady vibration of 300 million lives lived inside a structure that was itself a statement about what humanity had chosen to become. Outside, the Atlantic moved in its ancient rhythms against the megastructure's foundations. Above, the meridian ring crossed the sky. Higher still, the patience of tides held station with its weapons cold and its crew at rest, because the returning visitors were not enemies. They were something more complicated and more painful than enemies. They were the ones who had left. And humanity, as it had always done, had chosen to still be here when they came back.